we started recording this and had to stop it because Joe told me to make sure I did not start this webinar with the word all right. Apparently on every other episode I have done that. So either way, welcome to the 12th episode. So this is going to be a new topic. It's one that we didn't do last year, but we thought about it and just never got around to it. It's one that I'm excited to talk about. So this is definitely going to be like a podcast style episode where you can turn it on, driving down the road, cooking dinner, whatever you're doing. We don't have a lot to share. It's mainly just going to be a conversation. And we've got a guest with us today. So we've got Kyle Sams. So Kyle is a deer and elk biologist with us here at the department and has been for the last few years. But prior to working for us, he spent a lot of time guiding elk. So we're going to let him take a minute and introduce himself and make sure he introduces himself thoroughly because he's got some good tips. Got an interesting take as a elk guide for a number of years, but also working on the biologist side. So we think he'll be useful.
Yeah, my name's Kyle Sams, and I'm originally from East Kentucky, Pineville, where right in the kind of southern end of elk country. And like you said, John, I've been kind of on the biology side for about 7 years now. And before that, I worked with Division of Mine Reclamation and Division of Water. And fortunately for me, I was out looking at a lot of these reclaimed mine areas and spending a lot of time in elk country. And it was very helpful in terms of being a guide. And before that, I was a guide as well. And kind of did a stint as a technician for about 4 years and was doing some guiding stuff during that time frame. And so I've got several years on my belt as a guide, and it was a lot of fun, and I had brought a lot of knowledge to the table when it comes to elk hunting, and probably because I've spent a lot of time working with elk, and not just in Kentucky. I worked in Pennsylvania, Tennessee, North Carolina, North Dakota, did a little bit of stuff in Colorado for a short time there, but it's something that I really have a lot of passion about and enjoy. But it's something that I want to continue to do into the future. So that's maybe an option that I might pursue here soon.
Yeah. So Kyle's been a main one of the main people working on our habitat work, where he knows the mine reclamation laws and that kind of deal with bond release and stuff. That's really helped out. He's also a burn boss, so he's running the actual burns. Joe and I are just simply ponds that spray water occasionally and drive a four-wheeler around. Kyle runs the thing. So I think I failed when we started to actually tell anyone what this podcast was about, unless you got it from the title page. So this is going to be bull hunting tactics. So this is geared to those people with either sex archery tag and our bull gun hunters that are coming up here. I mean, by the time this airs, we'll probably be a month out from that September 10th opener. So we figured this was a good time to really kind of drill into ways to hunt bulls, because I typically, when I'm talking to people, I'll liken this to turkey hunting, where you're trying to call something into you. Kind of the way I play it. I know the way Joe does it, and I know the way Kyle does it. It's very much a run and gun turkey hunting type of thing, where you're up and running and trying to get something to make some noise and getting in tight to it and calling it in. But there's more than one way to do it. Kind of depending on people's abilities, depending on their aptitude and in their comfort level with doing that kind of stuff. There's other ways to do it. But I think to jump right in, I think the best way to start out is just, Kyle, run us down like the way you do it. If you could pick the situation, let's just set up the scenario. Let's say you got a bull bugling 2 ridges over from the road, right at the crack of daylight. Like, what's your play on that animal on a morning where you've got bulls bugling? And we'll get into the kind of the other scenarios where they're being quiet and that stuff. But if the perfect scenario happens and you got one bugling, what's the play?
Yeah, man, that's a perfect scenario, like you said. And I mean, that's how every elk hunter wishes the morning started with a bugling bull. And for me, the important thing would be to do, and specifically in East Kentucky, would be to close distance. I'm pretty aggressive, and knowing the terrain, knowing what WMA, where I can go plays a big part in that. Where that hunter can potentially go. But if you know your area and it's well within your area, I'm wanting to try to close that distance pretty quickly. And the reason being is because knowing that he's bugling now, I know he's just like, just similar to turkey hunting, they're probably going to stop bugling at some point. If it's how it usually is, they start bugling for a little while. I'm probably going to try to get close to that thing that possibly can. And
are you going to, I'm sorry to interrupt, are you going to try to get close to this animal before you start calling back at him, or are you going to call and then work your way and call as you go?
If he's bugling and I know where he's at, I don't need to make any noises whatsoever to get to that animal. And that's a really good point. And I mean, if I know he's there, and if he sounds like a mature bull, I mean, there's definitely a difference between bugles between a young bull and a mature bull. But if I know he's there, there's no point to make any noise. I don't need to have a cow party. I don't really need to bugle at him, unless it's like the kind of first morning bugle, and I hit one and he bugles back, and there's a couple other just see what else is out there, not just him bugling. But if I know that bull is bugling his head off, I'm gonna close the distance pretty quickly. With the one thing that's extremely important, and is that can really mess up a hunt pretty quickly. So that bull might be bugling, but you don't know what's between you and that bull. Likely there could be some cows, there could be some satellite bulls. So as you're going, I'm not trying to close that distance with a sprint. I'm walking at a okay pace on some sort of trail, or trying to be as quiet as possible. And as I'm going, as you're walking, and I've always thought this is really important, and every step you take, the horizon changes. So I always think, and I always do this, and I scan the horizon after every few steps. So it might slow me down a little bit, but it also gives me an opportunity that I might walk up on an unknowing bull that's not bugling. Maybe it's still a good bull. Maybe he's just not as dominant at that point in time as the one that's bugling his head off. Or maybe it's a cow. Either way, I'm scanning that horizon that I know that I'm walking in, just to make sure that I'm seeing something before it sees me tromping through the woods. So once I get to a certain distance of that bull, if I know I got good ground to walk on, somewhat damp ground that's not going to make a lot of noise, or somewhat of a game trail that I can sneak on, then I'm going to take my time and see how close I can get to this animal, and to see what else is around this animal. If it's a bow shot, I can get to this animal, potentially see what's going on. And at that point, if I'm an archer, then I'm probably going to have my hunter set up, and I'm going to drop back a little bit and try to call the bull over to me.
So what kind of distance are you thinking before you do that setup?
I mean, and that's, I will say the thing about all this, everything is kind of, when you're out there, it's extremely situational dependent. There's a whole lot of factors that go into this. And then the number one thing is my wind. I mean, and I guess I didn't mention that from the very beginning. That's something that you should be considering at all times when it comes to elk. And that is the one thing that will mess you up, and you might not get to make that beeline to that elk because of the wind. So definitely, that's the number one thing that's going through my mind is the wind. Also the horizon as I move through the woods. I'm going to get as close as I can to that bull. I mean, if there's if it's starting to get loud walking through the woods, I'm going to stop right there. As far as I can get to that animal, close as I can get to that animal without making a lot of noise, that's as far as I'm going to go. Once I get to that point, that's when I'm probably going to start calling.
Yeah, and you're probably using, it's very easily you could have 100 elk just on the other side of like the top of a mountain, and you might work them around. So, I mean, kind of like where Joe and I turkey hunt down in the mountains, you can get surprisingly close when you got good topography that maybe folks from Central and West Kentucky might not be used to having.
Yeah. And I think, Kyle, we should preface this. I know, we're going to talk about a lot of situational stuff and we know everything's dependent, but just keep it in mind from the perspective that over 75% of our hunters every year have never done anything like this.
Yeah.
So it's really just to give guys an idea of things to be thinking about, like some generalities and how you would go about approaching these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think all three of us agree, if we've got one bugling on its own, we're gonna, and that was the exact situation I had last fall with my buddy down there on Big Laurel. One of those situations where I blew a bugle, had two answer kind of in the same area, and my first thought after that is, what's the wind doing? And second thought was, I really wished I knew what the road system was on the other side. I was covered on the kind of the top of the ridge where I'd scouted the day before, but from there I was walking with the wind towards it. So we ended up doing some serious bushwhacking, only to later find a road. I mean, I think could have killed that bull had I known that road was there. So that goes back to scouting, but really it was wind, and it was, all right, how do I get there?
Yeah. And just thinking about, someone who's, elk hunting is not deer hunting, and that you should not go into the mindset that this is going to be a deer hunt. And most of our hunters are Kentucky hunters, and we got a great whitetail state, and it's far different from that. Yeah, you can set up in a tree stand, and I know we'll talk about some of these scenarios later on, but it can work. But from my perspective, and I was very, very successful at what I was doing. The running, gunning for elk worked for me and my hunters. And like you said, the wind is very important, and being able to use the topography to your advantage is something that you should always do. And if you can walk a road, like you said, if you knew those roads were on the other side of that, you might have come at that thing a completely different way and been, successful. And if any time that you can sneak up on these things, that's what you should do. Some folks like to do the cow party where you're calling and you're being loud, sound like a couple of elk coming through the woods. I've never done that, simply because I like, for lack of a better phrase, the cover of darkness. I like to be quiet, and I'm not sneaky. And that's, to me, is far more important for someone who may not know elk hunting as well as I do. You want to use those advantages. It's better if the elk does not know you're there.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, their eyesight is a little bit poor, their hearing is a little bit more poor. You're never going to beat that nose. So if you can be sneaky and not make a lot of noise coming in, he can see you move and not really understand what that is. But if you're trying like cow party approach, or like making a lot of noise coming in, like or calling him to you, he's looking for something that's out of place. So you definitely have the advantage if you can be a little sneaky getting up on it without him knowing, because then he's not expecting anything different.
Yeah, and kind of going back to that scenario, once I got, I'm thinking about wind, I'm thinking about the terrain, and I'm thinking about my substrate that I'm walking on. Once I get to that point of, okay, I can't go any farther, what am I looking to do to get this bull to come to me? Now, anytime that, I would much rather hunt a bull all day long than a cow, because I can pull a bull to me. It's a lot harder to get a cow to come to you. And there's a lot more eyes typically. And if you're hunting a satellite bull or even a herd bull, you can pull, if you're good enough, or if you're lucky enough, is probably the better term, you can potentially pull that bull over to you. And so once I get to that point, thinking about what I'm doing, I'm thinking about, all right, how am I going to call? How am I going to let this bull know that I'm over here as another elk? Do I want a bugle? Do I want a cow call? And that one's another very situational, and it just comes with experience. If I'm within 100 yards of this bull, I'm probably I call that the bread basket for me, getting basically getting right in the bread basket, and that kind of zone of all right, I'm gonna bugle, and if this bull's got cows, then Of course, I don't want to make a really strong dominant bull bugle, so I might make a kind of a sub, for lack of a better word, a subdominant bull bugle. And more times than not, in my experience, within that bread basket, that bull is going to be like, oh crap, somebody's here, he slipped in on me, I need to check this out. And he will make a move to come to your direction. And if I've got decent cover, or if my hunter's in front of me, then I always carry, this is a hot tip, I always carry a small elk antler with me that I found somewhere along the ways. And I always do. If you don't have the elk antler, find a good 2 or 3 inch in diameter, decent log, preferably something that's, you know, is dried out and that's light that you can carry. And I'm going to find me a small tree and I'm going to rake it pretty good. And that is, more times than not, for me, is a to get the elk, the bull within archery range, is it's a deal sealer. I mean, that for me is extremely helpful to get that bull if you're within a certain distance. Now, if you're further out and you make a dominant bull bugle, I've had bulls turn and run away and pull their cows away from me because they don't want to take the risk of losing their harem. But that's what I would do as a guide. Now, for a hunter in that situation, you're that close, and you can't get any closer because it's going to be too loud, or you can see them. And if you start moving, they're going to see you. I might try to cow call, or try to figure out where they're going, and you might back out and drop down and get in front of them, or and wait for them to walk right by you. That is a really good technique that a lot of people don't really take advantage of. At least in my experience, I'm aggressive, but if you're don't have the knowledge of an experienced elk hunter, then dropping back and waiting for them to come to you is a good option.
Kyle, real quick, before we get too far along off this, you're talking about where you would set up your hunter, where you yourself would set up. A lot of mistakes that I see are the way that people position themselves around their cover. Can you kind of talk about where the hunter should be standing, how they should be, in relation to the cover that's around them?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because if you're an archery hunter, you've got to be able to move and pull back. And you want to use, that's a really tough question to answer, because there's so many factors that, you want to be able to make the shot. And you definitely want some cover, some good cover that's going to hide you. But at the same time, you want to be able to make the shot. And a lot of times on certain scenarios in East Kentucky, it's open forest. It's you got a closed canopy, and there's not a lot to hide behind it except for some mature trees. You might have some rhododendron or a mountain laurel that you can get behind, or some thickets, which would be ideal. But you don't want to immerse yourself so deep into that if it doesn't go the exact direction that you think it's going to go, which is oftentimes what happens, you want to be able to recover from that and adjust and be able to get that shot.
So you really don't have to conceal yourself as much as like a turkey hunter might, right?
Yes.
You don't want to suck yourself in there so tight that you can't move. You got to think about that. Don't put, a monster hemlock or something between you and where you think the elk's going to come, because you're not going to be able to shoot.
Right. And the key thing about when it comes to, even with whitetail and the elk, is movement. Movement is the key. So I feel like, in my experience, that whitetail are better at picking up movement, and elk are not, especially a rutting bull. And they're a little bit more forgiving than a cow. But you can get away with a little bit of movement if you've got, a tree between you and him. And just as long as you're not making a lot of swift movements, not moving, if you try to be as still as possible, but you can get away with a little bit of movement, with a little bit of cover, when they're within bow range. And I'm describing bow range as about 50 yards or closer. Yep. Preferably that perfect shot is going to be 30 yards closer.
Yeah, and I really think, we've talked about having a hunting partner, but it's what Joe and I do with turkeys. It's what I did with another one of my buddies when we really started getting serious turkey hunting. I'm a big fan of having, you know, you have your collar back a little bit, your hunter up front. All the hunter's got to do, whether it's bow or gun, is focus on doing the shooting. You can be back a little bit further and do the calling, maybe be completely hidden where you can move and, you know, change calls or whatever you got to do. I think that's a big plus in this game.
100%, because you're, you know, if you're out there turkey hunting or if you're by yourself, I mean, you got to do the movement to call, and then you got to adjust to get your bow up, and that's just really tough. And there's going to be a lot of people that do hunt by themselves, and you can be aggressive. If you're hunting by yourself, I think I would be a lot less aggressive if you don't know elk behavior. And it's one of those things that in East Kentucky, for anywhere for that matter, you can look at elk and see where they're going, and you can be aggressive to get to where they're going to be, at least where you think you're going to be. And that again is a really good option. And I've talked to a lot of hunters who may not want to hire a guide, and that's a really good technique that I tell them to, hey, if you're not comfortable getting in on those elk, you don't have to. You can go wait for them. It's not as aggressive, but you can be very successful with that.
Yep, absolutely. We used so two things just from the first part of this that we used a lot when we were darting elk back from my grad project was, number one, there was a whole lot of bulls that I snuck into dart range by looking at the top of their antlers. You know, it was a spot and stalk situation. I knew they were in this area. They were moving around feeding, but at a certain point coming up over some topography, I could see them. You know, I could tell when they were down feeding, and I'd crawl along and I'd see that point come up and know they were kind of alert, but they couldn't see me, but I could see them, you know. I'm talking, you know, my shed out here, they've got like that much, you know, like a 3-foot periscope that's useless except for the hunter, you know, you watch that thing. And then, you know, the other technique we used was you know, it was January, February, March. We weren't able to call them when we were trying to get them in and darting them. Getting in front of them, you watch them long enough, even if they're just moving slowly, they're still going somewhere. And then playing your stalk to get in tight, but in the direction, just let them wander past.
You
know, and that was probably the two ways that we got most of the 200 something elk darted those years. So that's good tips.
I think that's a good transition point. So we've kind of talked a little bit about, you know, the ideal situation, what you would do. What do you do on those days where they're just not bugling, Kyle, or another, I mean, it's very similar. What are you doing like that midday part of the day where the rutting activity is typically going to be lower? How do hunters find non-vocal elk, things like that?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say to that, so there's a lot of folks, including there's guides, and then there's also hunters that just want to go hunt the mornings and come back and go get lunch and then come back out for the evening, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's very successful. For me, the elk are out there, and whenever I go elk hunting, whenever I guide, I take people out there and I tell them that we're going to stay out there all day long. We're going to be there early, and we're not coming back until it's dark or we got an elk. And I mean, that's a giant advantage, because what do elk do in the middle part of the day? Well, they're much more lethargic. They're not moving around a lot. They're probably going to bed. They might get up and graze around and move a little bit here and there, but they're pretty much stationary for the most part. So what I do, especially if they're not bugling, you know, I'm going to look for sign, any elk sign, fresh elk sign. So I'm looking for the green scat with mucus membrane still on it. I'm looking for those just really, for lack of a better word, just sharp tracks in the water. If you're driving, walking along a road, you walk across a little puddle, and elk will walk the trails and the roads too. And I'm looking for those. And once I hit a fresh track or a fresh scat, if they're not calling and they're not being very vocal, I guarantee you that track is going to lead you right to an elk. And it might be a little bit longer. But the good thing is likely if you're following them early enough, you're going to be behind them. And that is a technique that I've used several times. I find a track. I know it's fresh track. I mean, and I just follow it till I hit the elk. It might be, a mile. It could be shorter than that. And because I know what they're going to do, especially in the mornings. They're going to go find someplace, some ridge, some flat area, maybe some oaks where there's acorns dropping, and they're going to hang out there. And if that's the case, and you catch up to them, and you might be 100 yards away, and for a really good example, I took a guy and his son out, and they were bugling. They were moving early, but then they just hushed, and we couldn't get them to talk. But I knew generalized where they're at. But I found their tracks, and I just followed them. We caught up to them, and we are, within 60 or 70 yards of these animals. We snuck up to them, and they're 30 or 40 elk, and I've got myself, the hunter and his dad, and we're right amongst them. They're not within bow range yet, but we're right there, and it's really cool. You might not be able to get that shot, but we had some good cover. We sat down and we watched elk for 6 hours. I think it was 6 hours before finally they stood up, and a big old cow elk just meandering around, kind of nibbling at some stuff, walked in and gave us a 30-yard shot.
Yep. And
that was probably one of the coolest hunts, because most of the time hunters don't get to see all that elk behavior that's going on, and that they didn't even care if they got the shot at that point, because they were among elk for 6.5 hours or so. And but I guess my point is if they're not bugling, find fresh tracks if you can and follow them.
Yep. And I see the midday elk hunting, like, that turkey that gobbles at 11:30.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can kill a turkey that gobbles at 11:30 a lot quicker than I can one that gobbles at 6:15.
Mm-hmm.
He's gobbling at 11:30 because the hens have gone to nest and he's lonely. He will come for a mile. And so just thinking back to the elk biology episode, you got the dominant bull that might be bedded with his cows, but the satellite bulls, they got one thing on their mind. They're hunting for a girlfriend. And that midday, they're restless. They might bed up a little bit, but I think it's a time where they're fairly susceptible as well to get some of those other bulls that are kind of orbiting around, doing their satellite thing, to roll right in on you.
Yeah. And thinking about that, and something I mentioned earlier about, as you're moving, your horizon's changing constantly. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many times that exact scenario has happened, that I know that something's bugling, or I know there's elk out in front of me, and a bunch of them, but in between where those elk actually are and me, I run into a satellite bull, and sometimes he's, the hunter doesn't want to shoot them, and other times they're super happy. And if I hadn't been paying attention and looking at my horizon as it changes as I'm moving through the woods, we would have pushed them right out there, and maybe they would have ran down and pushed the other ones over the bottom of the hill, or down the hill and to the bottom of the holler, and that's never a good situation.
Yeah, it's a fine balance, a delicate dance when you're being aggressive, not to just blow everything out of the whole country.
Yeah, elk hunting is by far my favorite hunting. It's so fun. It's a very, very much like turkey hunting, like you guys were saying. The big difference is that, when you're turkey hunting and they're walking through grass, you can't hear them or see them because their little head is just poking through the grass. They see you because you're trying to look. You're like, is he there? I don't know. And they see you, then you're next thing you know, you're hearing putting and running off. With the elk, it's a lot more forgiving. You're going to see that elk if he's within 50 yards, unless you've got some serious cover between you and him. You're probably going to hear him too. And that makes it a lot more forgiving, and versus when it comes to elk hunting and or turkey hunting and elk hunting. But also, if you do booger one of these guys up, they can run a good distance. But the good thing about elk is when you booger them, when you booger a whitetail, try to find a whitetail's tracks as they're running through the woods. It's just about impossible because they're running and they're so small, and there's really only a few of them But when you're looking at elk and you booger, even if they got 4 or 5 running, you can usually find the track and you can follow them and figure out where they're going.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Well, that was a good one for the midday. Let's talk. Let's talk about kind of like on the periphery of the rut. So like our season is set up. We try to give our archery hunters, that pre-rut to a little bit of peak, and then our rifle hunters hit the peak, and then on to where it ends. So, especially if it's 98 degrees in the middle of September, like it very well could be, you're probably not going to have a lot of bugling or rutting activity in that first week. How do you approach those early elk or those elk that just aren't rutting? Like, what are some good ways to hunt those?
And when they're not rutting yet, what I would do is, again, I will say one thing we've kind of mentioned a little bit, scouting is probably, if you have the ability to scout, that is probably the single most important thing to elk hunting, in my experience. Knowing the area is half or more of the battle. You know what's out there, and knowing where the elk tracks are, kind of, maybe if you've seen some elk, that's huge. So if you're finding bulls scouting, then I would key in on those areas, and then I would look for tracks if they're not bugles. They're going to be very similar to, at that time of the year, they're going to be similar to a whitetail. They're kind of, for lack of a better word, a pattern-ish. I don't think they're as patternable as a whitetail early on like that, but I still think that they are to some degree. And they might have a bigger area of movement, but that they're going to be back to those areas at some point. And I think that knowing those areas, you can potentially, find some tracks and then following right on top of them if you're lucky.
Well, I guess that's a good part to start. Said they're not vocal. We're scouting. We're learning the roads. What are like some areas or some terrain features that you as an outfitter would have tried to key in on when you're going to look at a new area, right? Like, what am I going to focus on in my early scouting efforts to try to learn what's here and what they're using?
Yeah. So that's good. That's good. So naturally during that time of the year, I'd be focusing on the cooler portions of the terrain. So like the north slope or the north side of the mountain where it's getting less
sites.
Yeah. Things like that where it's a little bit cooler. You're not getting that heat, that sun. For anything south and west is going to be hotter. East and north is going to be a little cooler. I definitely focus on that from the start. But the one thing about these reclaimed mines, elk are definitely grazers and to some degree, and they definitely use these reclaimed mines. But during the heat of the day, I would imagine, I wouldn't want to be out in the heat, and they're big animals, and they don't really get rid of heat very well. So they're going to try to get into the timber pretty quickly. And the things that I'm going to key on is those north side fingers, like something that's got a long finger that may not have a lot of understory, maybe a little bit. And you'll know where these elk have been. They like to go out on these big fingers when they're not pressured, and they'll go down out there and they'll lay up on these points where they've got some pretty quick access to escape, which is straight down the mountain a lot of the times, and you're not going to catch up to them. So that's those long fingers that have a gradual decline, that have some quick access to some that real steep terrain, is some of the areas that I'm going to key in on, because that's probably where they're going to be bedding down.
And that's something we've hit on. That's something we've hit on quite a bit. The ideal place is like that finger that's got grass on the upper side where they've mined, and then it runs off slowly sloping down through some oak timber with acorns, and then drops off into middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that's that is a perfect scenario where I would focus on in terms of trying to find, bull or cow for that matter. What I've gathered, pre-season like that, before they're really rutting, is cows and bulls tend to not mingle. And so if you're in an area where you're finding only cows and spikes and you want a bull, then you probably should be moving, looking for some more signs somewhere else where you can find bulls until they start coming together.
Yeah.
What about, I'll ask you your thoughts on this one because I get this question a lot. What do you think about the influence of water in Kentucky as opposed to what you would traditionally read or hear about in the Western US?
Yeah, so water is, not as important because we have a lot of green, lush forage. But as dry as it's been here recently, as hot as it gets in September recently, having a water source close by that you can check out for sign. Things get dry this time of the year, and that is going to be a place that I would key on if it's really hot and dry. But if it's not, it's not as important to me as if I was hunting out west. That's for certain.
And we've had that season 2019 had that big September drought. It was 100 degrees. That'd be a year to key in on water.
Yes.
The year before that, when Joe and I helped a fella out in Robinson Forest, we had 2 of those hurricanes that come up in the Gulf and blow through Kentucky, and we had so much water that we were waist deep crossing creeks.
Yeah.
So I think it depends. It very much depends on what the weather's looking like in September. We've got this pretty much this week. The whole weather pattern shifted from dry and hot to rainy and hot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it'll depend. They're kind of, I guess, my thing and what I've seen roaming around, you might have a water hole that's a wallow or a source to drink in. If it's got fresh sign in it, that's obviously a spot to put on your list.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting on a mine pond that just might have a little area where they come down and drink, that's not really something that they necessarily would go check out every day.
No, and that's a good point. That's one thing as a guide or elk hunter that I have never ever done, and that is post up at a spot and wait for the elk to come to me, in like a tree stand or a blind. I have never done it, and there are people that are successful with that. That's going to take a little bit more homework, and you're going to need a little bit more time probably. So that's what you're sacrificing there. So I've never done that. That's not my style. I don't have the patience to sit there and wait for an elk. And knowing how they work, I'm going to go after them. But it is an option that is successful, but you're going to spend a lot more time sitting there and seeing nothing.
Yeah, Joe's
just sitting here giggling at the thought of Kyle having patience on it.
Yes. And I guess that we put the asterisk next to that is he's patient when he needs to be, but he also, if he has more than a cup and a half of coffee, you got to tie him down and keep him focused, just from my experience. So,
yeah. But if you all don't mind, I would like to talk about that just a little bit, because again, most of our hunters, white hunters, they've never elk hunted before. Let's talk about maybe if you were going to do it, how you would do like a blind approach, right? We have a lot of hunters who are mobility impaired or for one reason or another. If you had that as a client, how would you kind of set up a blind set or like a passive set where you're just kind of calling and hoping something comes in? Can you kind of talk about that? Because I've probably got that question 3 or 4 times this week.
Yeah, and especially early season. And the thing about elk is, even during the rut, the bull can push the cows around, but really, the cows are where they're going. So even in early season and during rut, even later season, they're going to come back through an area eventually. It might be 2 or 3 days, 4 days, but the cows are going to come back through, cycle back through a general area at some point. And what I would focus on, if it was me setting in a blind or a tree stand, kind of that scenario that I described a minute ago, where you've got that long ridge on the north side of the mountain, if it's hot outside, that has quick access to some escape cover or escape terrain for that matter, and have access to that big grass reclaimed area, and right where that grass butts up against that tree line is where I'm gonna put my tree stand. or my blind. And the reason why I'm putting it there is because, once they filter out into that field, they can go several different directions. But when they're coming down to that point, they kind of compile into not a single file line, but into a much
A lot of
tighter.
times they do.
Yeah, they do, and they compile right on top of each other, and they'll walk down this one single path for the most part. And heck, that ridge is probably not 50 or 60 yards wide, so maybe a little bit wider than that. So you're reducing your areas they can go down to right within bow range. So that's kind of, or maybe even a little bit further back, tucked in to that down that finger is where I would set up.
And if they're good and chill, they're going to take the easiest path.
Yeah.
These things can run down the side of a straight up and down mountain, but if things are chill, they're going to take the easy path. They're going to walk. They're going to stay on the trail. They're going to be where it's flat. They're not going to walk through a big pile of briars.
Mm-hmm.
They'll take the easy path.
Yeah, for certain.
Yeah. So that's blinds, and that's what we're saying. There's a million ways to do this. Without a doubt, I think you're better off being mobile and doing your thing, but there will be scenarios and folks that will do better taking what Kyle just talked about and putting a blind up. I had a fella that was paralyzed to some extent that did 4 days in a blind and came home with a nice 6x6 last year, and that was what he was limited to do, and he found the best spot to put it and sat there from daylight till dark and put an arrow in a nice bull.
That's what it's going to take
done.
Time. That's for certain. Most of the time, you could be lucky one walk right up on you, but and that's definitely a sacrifice you'll have to make.
So Joe's got some notes on here about passive calling. I mean, I think from a blind like that would be a good opportunity to do some calling like that. When would you I'm thinking like in my mind, run and gun turkey hunting is more like in the midday, like cutting and running, like, cut in one area, see if you get something to answer. If not, you're going a couple 100 yards, cut again, try to get one to fire off. But like just passive calling, I don't know in this situation if that would be like,
so what
up. I mean, it's
like the way that I would describe this one is like, say we're up in the mountains, we're hunting, nobody's gobbling. We know that they've been in this area. There's not really a better option to go here, there. Maybe I'm 2 miles in, so it's not worth getting in the truck and checking another spot. I'm just going to set up in a nice looking spot, try to maybe passively call something into me. Maybe I can get somebody to come in silently. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, passive calling. I mean, like I said, I'm pretty aggressive, and I don't necessarily do that much. Early season, I feel like you might have to do some of that versus late season, where you can go set up on a high knob, and while when the foliage comes off, you can pick these guys out. It's a little harder than out west sometimes, but you can pick these guys out sitting on a bench somewhere on the side of the mountain during late season. But early season, if they're not bugling, or if it's mid part of the day, they're just kind of hunkered down and not really doing anything, I'm going to take my time walking through the woods. And if I've done my scouting, and try to cut a track. I can't express how important that is to the style of hunting that I use, is to find a fresh track. And if you can do that, you can follow that out to where they are and get close. And sometimes, you might be far enough away to where if you're hunting that bull and he's not calling in the mid part of the day, that you're not going to get him to bugle. Sometimes they just won't, but you get within that, what I say, the breadbasket range, that 100-yard range, and you hit him with a bugle, it's like almost he can't help it to call. So, and I guess in terms of just that passive calling, I don't really think it's passive where I walk, 300 or 400 yards and call, walk 300 or 400 yards and call like you would a turkey. I think the distance would be much greater in my mind, because you think about turkeys. I mean, at least in my mind, I feel like they're more spread out over the landscape, whereas elk are not. they're all together. So, and it's just in my mind, it feels like that calling when I don't know where they're at passively. I just feel like that wouldn't work for me. Now, I'm not saying that it wouldn't work. You could definitely try it. But again, it's one of those things that you're calling. If you're calling, then you better be taking your time and looking at that horizon as you're walking, because there could be something coming into you. Because sometimes they will do like a turkey, and they'll walk right in on you when you're calling, and maybe they're on a real good trail. They're not making any noises, and they're not bugling at you. And then you're like, "Oh crap, I'm not ready. He's 40 yards in front of me."
Or just something tear off down the mountain.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Well, we had that similar, the one that my dad killed in Colorado 2 years ago. We were sort of like, it was midday, it was hot, we were tired, we were going to set up. But I always like to, I don't like to just sit around and eat lunch. Like, you know, we had the guns out there. We were already hidden. You know, we were in a spot where we could be actively hunting if something rolled past. And, you know, we just sat down in the right spot, cow called, and had 3 bulls. Just, they couldn't get to us any quicker.
yeah.
You know, and I don't necessarily know if that was passive calling or what you would call that, but it worked in that scenario. We knew we were in elk. There were elk amongst us, you know.
You guys are just beating me down on my notes section here. Okay. I'm just trying to highlight some of the different things that people ask about. Come on.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think at times you could pick up a satellite bull if you're in good elk habitat, just making some cow calls.
Mm-hmm.
Those things, I mean, they don't think twice about walking a mile to see what's going on. I mean, you know, that satellite bull could have just got his butt kicked, and he's looking for some fresh territory, fresh cows, fresh bulls to try to fight with. And I could see them just rolling right in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting here trying to think about, you know, if there's any time that I've done passive calling, and I'm sure, I know there's been some times where I've been like, man, there's just nothing going. I'm not finding a track, and I'm called. But at the same time, I'm not sitting still. And it's not, I mean, yes, I can't sit still, but it's because I'm looking. All I know is that there's not elk on top of me.
You're looking for a very specific type of hunt and a type of animal.
Yeah. And
that's the right situation.
Yeah. And I might call, but I'm not sitting still. I'm moving in a direction where I think elk might be, or if I was an elk, or if I know where they're going to be bedded or I usually bed, I might move that direction and might do some passive calls. But again, taking my time, looking at that horizon, making sure nothing's changing, making something that pop up that I didn't know was there. And sometimes you'll get, if you hit the right note on a cow call, you'll get a cow to talk to you, and you very likely get a bull to talk to you.
Yeah, I think, I guess from my just interest in elk hunting, I think, growing up here in Kentucky, we deer hunted, we duck hunted, we turkey hunted, and I love turkey hunting, but early on I didn't really know the best way to do it. I mean, hell, we were all learning. We'd only had the season open for a couple of years at that point. But deer hunting, to me, sure, you can scout, you can make stuff happen, but ultimately you're in your tree stand and you're letting the chips fall where they may.
Yep.
You put that tree stand in the best spot, but still that thing's got to run past you. The way I turkey hunt and the way that I've been elk hunting, you've kind of got the ability to make your own luck in a sense. And I guess at the end of the day, even if you don't kill one, you've tried as hard as you could, if that makes sense. And it's what I like about it. If you're sitting somewhere and there's no elk, there's not any reason to say that you can't cover 5 or 6 more miles that day and, find some sign or set things up better for the next day.
Yeah. Or cross that place off your list.
Yeah. Or bail out and go to plan B, C, D, whatever it is. And I think that's what really keeps me. It's a fulfilling, those elk are always there. The midday hunting. I mean, last year we had bulls bugling all through the middle of the day. you know, and we were on our feet, moving, hunting, trying to make something happen all day. And that to me is the cool part about it.
So that's kind of what the way I look at it too is and what I tell people that I'm not hunting with is like, don't be afraid to make a move.
Mhm.
And don't hesitate. I would rather make a move and learn from it versus sit there and status quo is going on and nothing's really changing. And if I make a move and it's a wrong move, then I've learned that, okay, maybe I tweak it this way a little bit, do it, come at it this way next time. And that, I mean, it's, while you're out there, it's just a learning lesson as you're going. Even for myself, who's been on several elk hunts. And I mean, every time I go out, it's not the same situation. I don't care how many times you go out there. A technique that I'm really good at and been doing for 50 hunts might not work that 51st hunt. And, I might do something a little off that might be buggered them or pushed them.
But that's the thing. Anybody that's turkey hunted longer than about a day knows that it's just, you take like a handful of dice and roll them in the morning. And that's it. It's one of those things that as soon as you think you got it figured out, it'll surprise you. And I think that's what makes it cool as well. But what we've talked about today, there are some things that will put the cards in your favor. One thing I was curious at, this is a little bit of an aside, and we can talk. We're taping an elk calling episode here today as well. And I don't know which order they're going to come in. So we're going to tape them and see what order they.
You already called this episode 12.
I did. We're all right. So calling will be next. But my thing with like using a bull bugle as a locator and how that plays into the tactics, because to me, I'm big with either locating the turkey the evening before or locating it, blowing a crow call and getting that dude to gobble and getting in on him in the dark. And the hunt that I was on here in Kentucky last year with my good friend, I looked like a stinking professional for the first 5 minutes of that hunt, because we hiked up to the high spot. I stood up on a rock. I summoned all the breath that I had in my lungs and gave what was a very nice bugle. Surprised me as well. And just about the time I thought nobody was going to answer, I get those two to answer, which is that's the scenario we started with, but that's the thing. Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about using a bugle tube at other times during the hunt, because in my mind, it's like the bugle's the locator, but what you talked about earlier, you were using a bugle as an aggressive type of thing, not like, hey, I'm the cow. I'm bugling as a satellite bull or another dominant bull that's coming in. Talk a little bit about that, because I like, the more I can blow a bugle, I just like, if that was the only elk call, I just blow it all day long, which is not what
actually, the guy likes to call a duck all the way down to the water too. He just likes to hear his own hot breath.
So yeah, I just want to, like, I feel like the ultimate situation is me like 50 yards away, just coming on with the bugle. And then I'm actually playing out the scenario of Joe and I in Colorado coming up, where I basically take all the credit. All he's got to do is pull the trigger. I call it right into his face.
Well,
you don't hear me complain.
Yeah. Joe's been down that road before.
Yep.
Definitely the bugle is a phenomenal locator. I mean, if you can locate that bull and a general area where he's at, that gives you a giant advantage. Depending on the timing of the year, rut. I might walk if he's 1,000 yards away. I might walk 400 yards, 300 yards, and then let out another bugle.
Yeah.
And to let him know, hey, I'm moving your direction. And in my mind, depending on what's there, and again, this is a pretty much, it's one of those things. It's a feel. It's the feel situation. You kind of know the area, and the scenario, and you kind of it's a sporadic decision making because it's also dependent
Yeah.
on various things. So, but anyway, I might hit 300-400 yards down there, walk 300-400 yards, call again, and then as I'm getting closer, I'm because I know he's moving, depending on the time of the day. I know he's probably moving, and so I'm just trying to pinpoint where he's going and figure out what direction he's moving. That way, if I need to, the wind shifts, or if I'm coming around a bowl when I got good wind now, but if I get on the other side of that bowl, I'm gonna have bad wind. I might have to readjust by walking down the holler and getting in front of him, or something like that. So it's definitely, I would use the bugle in that scenario. At the same time, I may use a cow. I mean, I probably would use a cow call as well. But if I know that he's got a harem, or if I suspect that he might have a harem, I may not use a cow call because I'm probably a satellite. I'm gonna come in there and try to take your bulls. So it's a feel thing, but definitely would use a bull call in that aspect to locate. At the same time, depending on how mature I think that bull might be, and in my experience, that has something to do with it too. Instead of that bull call, after I locate that bull, I would use a cow call. Say, hey, I'm a cow coming into you. You guys there?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. And so if the cow is, to let him know that this cow is moving your direction, and I'm coming to hold up. Kind of in my mind, that's how it's working. That's and it wouldn't be constant. It might be every 300-400 yards they hit a couple of U's and do what I call the sexy U. It's kind of a double U, and that tends to work to get them to bugle.
So give us your best mouth call of the sexy U.
No, it's I can't do that.
All right,
My
we'll
mouth
leave that.
call's not that good.
We'll leave that for the next episode.
We'll have to bleep that one out.
I'm gonna ask Trinity what his definition of a sexy cow call is.
Yeah,
I think y'all got some good points here. I mean, the way I try to look at it and stress it is each animal is different, and I think it's a numbers game. But it's some of these animals are going to be dominant and aggressive and come running right at you if you bugle. Some of them are going to tuck their tail and run, and that has a lot to do with not only the animal itself, but also what other things the other hunters around you have thrown at them. Right? Yep. They might hear a bugle and just not do anything, but you can go into the woods and cow call and get a response. And I've had that happen several times in Kentucky.
Yep.
So, if you start doing one thing and it doesn't work, doesn't mean they're necessarily not there. It won't work. Just you might switch it up.
Yeah. Yep. And I think the good situation was when we were in Robinson, we were on top of those elk for hours, but I don't really ever feel like we got a bugle back.
Not until what we did that day that worked for us, they would just run and just move and move.
Yeah.
We snuck up until we thought we could go no further, kind of like cow.
Yeah. And
we called at them to where they literally had to do the minimal amount of movement or effort to just come and look at me.
Yep. And when they came and looked, they were within shooting range.
Yep.
So yeah, I got you.
Yeah. I was just going to say, there's been several times where I've been, I've, middle part of the day or just any part of the day where I've, I keep falling back on, if you find some tracks and, maybe I saw some elk and I wasn't able to make a play on them because if I knew that I made that play and was super aggressive at that point in time, that I potentially would booger them up and they'd bail off to the side of the mountain and I never see them again. So I would just go in where they're at, follow their tracks, and just take my time. And there's this one hunt that we tracked them from where the hunter, when we saw them up this ridge and they went in and we were several hundred yards away and we just kind of dropped them where they went in, really long ridge, kind of like what I described earlier. They were side hilling it. They were on the old logging road or old bench and just walking. And I knew exactly where they were going out on this really kind of gentle, before it drops off into no man's land, kind of gentle, gradual decline. It had some really good spots to bed, and it's a really long finger, probably 1.5 miles long. And it took us probably 4 or 5 hours to get out to them. We could hear them, we couldn't see them, but we were following them. We got up through there and we finally saw the cows moving around, a bunch of butts, and I couldn't see the bull. And we took about 2 more steps, and I was scanning, and I was looking in front of me, but if I hadn't scanned to my left or right, there was a 6x7 bull standing about 80 yards from us, broadside shot, looking down at the cows. And he blended in so well to the background. If I wasn't, I mean, he wasn't moving, but if I'd take another step, he would have saw me and busted me out of there. And I can't stress that enough is just look at that horizon. And that will be a game changer if you're on elk, to be able to get close to them, specifically with a rifle. And it definitely helps you if you got a bow.
Yeah. So in terms of the tactics, we good with everything we covered? You want to change gears? I got a couple wild card questions.
I mean, I think we've covered like a general swath. I'm over here writing notes trying to figure out how to recap this whole thing because it is kind of like
this is very much a
9-headed monster.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. So I was gonna take us down. I was gonna give, so one of my biggest questions here lately, especially for places with lots of public land. So let's take Unit 3, for example. You're looking at our maps where Unit 3, the public land's green. It's about 200,000 acres that's got miles and miles of road on it, tons of strip mine, and it's got elk. I mean, there's elk pretty evenly spread across all those areas in Unit 3. I know you got some experience in Unit 3. So let's say that you hadn't been a mine inspector and you hadn't worked for us and spent millions of hours up there. You, as an experienced elk hunter, let's say it's a unit in Colorado, but it's Kentucky. We're not looking for aspens and that kind of stuff. How do you digest that? What are you going to key into? And you've made a couple of points on this already dealing with topography. How are you going to figure out a place if you're driving down there Saturday morning where you're going to start and you're looking at Unit 3? And you can be as specific as you want, but just from the standpoint of preparing yourself to go down there and do a day of scouting, picking a needle out of a haystack is in terms of where to start.
Okay, so what I tell people and what I do is, and this is giant, and at certain parts of the year. So I'm going down there September, mid-September. Well, I think September 10th is opening day, right? Mm-hmm. And they're likely going to be doing some pre-rut stuff. Rut's not far away if they're not doing some already at that point in time. I can't express how important the night scouting is. This might not make sense to some people, but they are very active and especially when it's hot at night, at some parts of the night. And and you can listen to them bugling and knowing that they're not going to move too far from those areas. So if you're down there scouting, spend a night or two camping, it's the designated spots, and listen. That will give you a big leg up on where these things are going. Other than that, if you're not staying and you're just coming down you're staying at a hotel there in Pineville or wherever, I'm going to be focusing on, those areas that I described earlier, where, and this could be just about anywhere because it's a lot of, I mean, East Kentucky is, I mean, it's very similar, but a lot of ridges, steep ridges. You got these reclaimed mine areas that are great habitat for elk and other species. And but I'm looking for those fingers, those areas that might kind of pop out. So if you're looking at, for instance, Onyx or something like that, look at the topographic aspect of that and try to find those flat areas before you go down. And as you're going down, you want to ground truth that and see what's there, because just about guarantee if you find some flat area that's near that long finger, that's got some oaks on the ridge, that's adjacent to an open area, that would be a heck of a spot to start, because likely there is elk have been bedding on there at some point. So you're going to see some sign. You're going to see some sign. It might be old, it might be new, but that'd be a really good starting point.
Yeah, and I just about bet you a Dairy Queen ice cream cone that any place like that will have some elk sign on it. Might be
yes.
Old,
Yeah.
But I mean, especially within all of Unit 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to pick those areas out, this is essentially what I've emailed to several hunters back. I mean, pull up something like Onyx where you can look at the aerial, you can see where the roads you can travel in your truck are, and then have the topography on there where you're seeing, the way they mine those places down there was mountaintop removal. Most of the mines are up on the very top, and you've got these ridges that might transition from grass into timber and run off for up to a mile, if not longer. And then at the end of them, it's straight down to the creek. And so that's really where I completely agree with you on keying into that stuff. So that'll be a big help. Trying to think what else while we can pick your brain here. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people are kicking up scouting trips coming up now, and that's been the big question. And I think I completely agree with them. Unit 3 is a daunting place to pick out. Joe and I have the same problem. I spent a little time 2 days ago looking at our unit in Colorado. It's massive. I've never been there. So, we're going through the same exact thing that you are, and doing some e-scouting and that kind of stuff. We're going to try to set ourselves up the best we can without ever stepping foot on it till, maybe the day before the season opens. So we're in a similar situation.
I can't express how important e-scouting is. I mean, that's something that, like Unit 3 or Unit 2, that I know like the back of my hand. I still e-scout it. I mean, I've not been on every inch of that place, and I want to know what's there. And that is a huge tactical advantage against elk if you know your area. So if you just from an e-scouting standpoint, once you get there, you're like, oh, okay, I kind of know where this goes, and that gives you a big advantage too. So in terms of just other things that you can point out, e-scouting, look for those like I said, those fingers that has good escape cover. One thing that you'll notice in some of these areas is it's not just, and that's something that we're trying to change in terms of, there's a lot of automall down there trying to root some of that stuff. But what that creates is these little pockets and what I call honey holes. And if you can find those pockets of grass that have that big wall of autumn olive, it's a small tree that is adjacent to those fingers with some hardwoods on top. Man, you're gonna set yourself up for potential success. I mean, there's gonna be elk in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that spot we found a couple of weeks ago. We'll keep that. We can't let everybody know about that little spot. It was one of those. So we were scouting fire lines and places to do habitat work, and Kyle, for some reason, walked us through about 80 acres of just completely dense autumn olive, where tall guys like myself are going over, going under, wading through.
It was hot for me.
Yeah. But then we came out into this like beautiful little 3-acre grass opening that was completely hidden, and there was absolutely elk sign all over it. So, and you'll find though, it's not like that's the only magic one out there. They're everywhere. It's just a matter of
no, there's only one.
There's
the only one, and I know it. Now you
find
know
it.
that.
Yeah, this is on a hunter access area that starts with an A. So that ain't gonna narrow it down for you. All right, here's my other question. Just while we're here, I know we got people that are going with guides and outfitters like yourself. You were a aggressive hunter. I mean, there was some, I know just from knowing you back in those days, there was a certain hunter that you catered to, which is great. We've got all different types of guides and outfitters. We got all different types of hunters. You had your type that you could be successful with, and that was they were generally guys that could honest to God, the easiest way to explain it is keep up with you. Tell me, I mean, you've been around folks, and this is just purely giving some tips to those people that are hunting, going with guides and outfitters. What do they need to bring with them? Not in terms of gear, but in terms of attitude, fitness, that, mental outlook, that kind of thing. Just hit on that a little bit.
Yeah. So, and I guess I'll just, before I touch on that, I'll touch on, I'm not a guide anymore, but I knowing other guides, knowing what they're capable of doing, what myself was capable of doing. that's one question that you should ask your guide is, what's their hunting style? And I knew several guides that were go get like just run and gun and go right after them, really aggressive, and that worked for us. And for you to be successful, I wanted you to be similar to that, and that was my hunting style. Now, there's other guys that did it different and were very successful, so make sure you talk to your guide and know what's going on there. But in terms of what to expect, it is not a white-tailed deer hunt, and over the years, elk hunting is tougher. I mean, it's just we've hunted them hard, and it's a different dynamic now where they might be smaller herds and they are in the timber. And I can't express that one aspect enough. Is they're in the timber, they are smart. Just come with that attitude of this is going to be a fun hunt. And I can't tell you how many times that I've had someone that has harvested their elk on the first morning of the first hour, and they were excited, but talking to them later on, they're like, I don't really remember much of my hunt. I'm like, well, it was an hour long. And yes, you're paying the guide for a service, but this is a phenomenal hunt. And yes, you want to harvest your animal, but if you're not harvesting that elk on the first day or the second day or the third day or whenever you harvest it, that is going to make for a phenomenal experience. And I can't express that enough. I've had a few guys, one guy go 3 days, everybody else has been 1 or 2. The guy that went 3 days long with me, I'm still in touch with, talk to him regularly. And that is a lifetime long memory that he and I will never forget. It was fun. It was tough. And quite honestly, it was one of my favorite hunts that I've been on, regardless of my entire life. Yeah. So just come with an attitude of this is going to be fun and it's going to be tough. Things that I've always been told that things that you work for are better in the long run in terms of how you feel about them. They're worth it. So something that comes easy, you're not going to have a lot of, I killed this elk, and which is great. You harvest an elk, it's great. It's a good experience, but if it goes a little bit longer than you think, and when you do harvest that elk, it will mean a lot more to you because you put time and effort into it, and it's worth it. So just expect that it could be tough, and that's what an elk hunt is. These elk are smart. They're out there. There's plenty of elk out there. It's just they're smart. They use the timber to their advantage, and they've been hunted. And trust if you hire a guide, trust your guide. They know what they're doing. And one thing that I kind of hit on that, kind of to back up a little bit, when you're calling these guys, talk to them, call several of them. Don't just call 1 or 2 and try to fish for as much information that they're willing to give you. Even if you're not going to hire a guide, call them, talk to them. They might be willing to talk to you or give you some information that you can help piece together a phenomenal hunt. Mm-hmm. So, I can tell you, something I wanted to mention about, just for myself that, like I said, I got a lot of folks, and I tried to get the folks that could keep up with me because of the way I hunted. And I had several guys that did, and there was one individual person who said he could do it, but when it came down to it, he couldn't. And that was really sad, that I couldn't get him within 50 yards of the elk. He had a rifle tag, and we literally got out of the truck and we walked 100 yards, and he was not in the greatest of shape to say this, but and he was older, but he told me he could do a lot of hiking, and he did, and he didn't. We walked 100 yards, and there was literally an elk 100 yards away from us, and all he had to do was go down the backfield 50 yards to get a shot at this elk who was bedded down 50 yards at the base of this hill. So he was 100 yards from us, and he couldn't do it. And that was really tough for me to swallow, but he was upset that he couldn't make it down the hill. And long story short, we didn't harvest that elk, and that was pretty much the end of the hunt because he didn't realize what East Kentucky was. And what I'm getting at here, the whole point of this conversation is East Kentucky is not the West, but I guarantee you it is just as steep and treacherous. You've got leaves to deal with. You can slip and fall. I mean, it is steep, and if just be aware that that it's going to be a challenge for you to go up and down those mountains if you're not prepared for that.
Let's not forget yesterday's rock and mud climbing adventure.
Yeah.
Yes. I was very impressed with what I saw with you, Joe, going up that hill. It's basically sheer cliff, and he climbed up it.
I was sitting there waiting for my elk hunting partner to be laid up with a broke leg for the next 4 months.
I was just trying to get away from all the rolling boulders coming down the mountain.
Yeah, to add some context, we had our last research calf born last night. And our grad students that normally do that work are all at a conference. So the three of us had to rolled out of here about 3 o'clock and went down there and caught the last out calf. So that was fun. And it was on top of a mountain.
Yeah.
So, all right, Joe, you got our recap. You got the recap.
I think so. I've tried. It's kind of convoluted. And there's a lot, obviously, we covered, but we're trying to give the information that we can. And
Tactics are hard.
throw stuff out. It is hard, and it's a new one. We'll get better as we go. But I've got numerous points here. The first one is to scout in the field, according to the stuff that Kyle's told us. Be aggressive unless you shouldn't. Scout at night.
Be aggressive unless you shouldn't. I love that.
I like that. That's one of those things. It's a feel situation. You're feeling it out.
Yeah.
Flesh it out a little more. Yeah, if you can be aggressive, you have the opportunity to be quiet and do it.
Don't be afraid to try something different if what you're doing isn't working, or be adaptable.
Yep.
Be aware of your surroundings. Use the terrain to your advantage. Fat Ninja. You can't kill them on the couch, so take advantage of all the time of your season.
Mm-hmm.
Have numerous backup plans, and then scout on the computer. That's what I got.
I like it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Can that count as my closer for this week?
Yeah, we'll let that count. We'll let that count.
Can you count that as a closer? That was a recap.
It's a recap.
Well, that's all right.
In closing, I mean, I could say in closing.
I would have never got that good a recap together. So yeah, I mean, I just think I would love for everybody to the experience I had in Colorado a couple of years ago. I learned a lot because we were in the bulls, and I had plenty of bulls that I could mess up and still have bulls to go after, if that makes sense. I feel like that was like 10 years worth of hunting condensed down into 5 days, just because we were on an area. We just lucked right into fired, pushed a bunch of elk in there. So I got to experience a lot of this stuff. I got to try to, I had a day where I blew a bugle and I literally shut every elk up on the property. The next day you blew a bugle and you had them running at you. It's one of those things. It's best I can say, it's like a turkey hunt. And I think all the experienced turkey hunters out there know that there's some things you can do, but at the end of the day, you're flipping the coin on what that turkey wants to do, or what happens, or that hen that walks down your gun barrel and starts putting and runs everybody off. That's going to be the same. I mean, it's the closest analogy I can use to elk hunting. But without a doubt, there's some things you can do in your advantage. And I, by far, both in Colorado and last year on that hunt in Kentucky, probably wasn't aggressive enough. Like the first day of the hunt, I had in my mind, I'm going to slow play these things. I don't want to blow them out of here. It's one of those things. There were other elk in there that we could have found. We should have just rolled in hot. And you can't, we had a 5-day hunt. There's not a whole lot of time to mess around and learn that stuff. So I think I will tend to err on the aggressive side moving forward, which is kind of natural anyway. So with that, Kyle, you got to give us a closer, and you got to take up the slack for Joe.
I can try. I mean, I can make a stab at it,
And let's let you make a stab. I also warned both of these fellas that the closer would be coming, and I was expecting something. I want the hunters watching this to be like, I want them to write it down on their Post-it note, put it on the fridge. and just
Then how
had
was
it.
yours that? How was yours? I don't understand how yours was like some giant proclamation of elk hunting wisdom.
I've not even closed it yet.
Oh, so he just likes to go see us all and then one up us. Well, I would just say, take advantage of the situation, enjoy what you're doing, enjoy the experience. You know, most of us have not got to do it in Kentucky before. So it's definitely a cool experience. And I think if you go into it with the right mindset and the right attitude, that it will, you know, kind of drive that passion moving forward, because elk hunting is really cool.
Yep.
And I would encourage you to, you know, make the most of your opportunity.
Yep.
Yeah. So my closing thought would be, and it's kind of something that we've already hit on. And the reason why I'm saying it again is because I think it's that important. Joe hit it in his recap, has mentioned it a couple of times. I mentioned it a couple of times. And if you have the ability to learn the terrain, do it. That is, I can't express how important that is to your hunt, is knowing the area that you're going to hunt is a huge, huge advantage to you getting an elk. And that's where I'll leave it. Because that is, I feel like that is, even if you can't be there physically, do your part and learn the area as best you can on a map.
Yep. My closer is going.
All right, hit me with the good one. It better be spicy.
Very spicy. My closer is going to be that I can promise you that Amazon will have you elk calls at your house within about a week. I did that. I've done that a couple times this year. I like, my closer is learn how to make a bugle call. You can go in Sportsman's Warehouse in Lexington right now and pick up a Primos bugle, probably be blowing it by the end of the day. Like, I wouldn't be in either sex archery hunter or a bull gun hunter without a bugle. Take it further, learn how to cow call. You've got time. I mean, one evening standing in the garage, you don't want to drive the wife crazy. You'll pick up good enough to do it. I think watching some of the videos on YouTube make it sound overly complicated. It's not. They make blow type calls. We'll get with this on the next webinar, but I mean, I would feel pretty naked elk hunting without calls. For the early, for the rut and bull hunts, I could live without them during cow season or something. There's other tactics at that time, but get on the Amazon. They will have it to your house quickly. You got plenty of time to learn. That's my closer. Not that good, but we'll roll with it.
Soft serve.
So I'm gonna share some contact info. Kyle, buddy, I appreciate you coming on here. We've definitely picked Kyle's brain. Joe and Kyle have hunted Colorado together in the past and been successful out there. So appreciate you coming on and letting us pick your brain for a little while. I don't know. This may be a 3-hour long webinar. I haven't even looked at the time.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you inviting me on. I really enjoyed it. I will say that you're going to have to learn how to do some editing.
We don't edit these.
That's the beauty of it. It's all raw.
This is
raw,
wide open, raw, and honestly, they're getting a little loose. We're gonna have to tighten it up a little bit, but we'll.
One thing we didn't talk about this guy right here, we don't have to, but we wanted to. But
if you're in YouTube, keep your eyes open.
We'll say that. If anybody can guess what that is and or where it came from, we'll give you another hot tip.
Yeah.
We'll save that story for another live.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. We'll have one on elk calling. So these two will pair up pretty nice. So appreciate it, everybody.